2,000 years ago, ancient civilizations such as the Roman Empire in the west and the Han Dynasty in the east had risen to prominence. In the modern Middle East, the Parthian Empire ruled ancient Persia and the surrounding regions from their main capital at Ctesiphon. These cultures are known to us as being almost unfathomably ancient, but what was ancient to them? 6,000 years ago, 4,000 years before Augustus created the Roman Empire, one of the first true urban settlements emerged in the ancient region of Sumer. Its people's accomplishments sowed the seeds for civilization to spread, first to the ancient Near East and then the entire world. Welcome to our series on the ancient Near East, beginning with the period from Uruk to Akkad. The human population of Mesopotamia and several other regions gradually began to adopt a more settled mode of living. This was a lifestyle which contrasted with the earlier ways in which humans had survived, most commonly by functioning as hunter-gatherers. They would begin to cultivate, modify, plant, and harvest crops in the earliest forms of agriculture and herd animals. Many humans gradually began to live in this manner in small village communities, while others retained their primal hunter-gatherer lifestyle. However, over the thousands of years following the glacial retreat, agricultural lifestyles increased in popularity. In ancient Mesopotamia, the increased surpluses of food generated by agricultural production would soon lead to the blossoming of civilization's first seeds. At this point, it is important to detail the unique geographical and environmental state of Mesopotamia and to understand how this affected the development of civilization there. The name itself literally means land between rivers, specifically the Tigris and Euphrates. The latter of these watercourses was given the name Burinan by the native Sumerians, a word meaning great rushing flood, a phenomenon which would define the relationship of the native people with their gods and land. Consequently, many prominent Mesopotamian deities such as Enlil, the chief god of the pantheon, were related to wind, air, and storms. The faithful of Sumer would seek to appease these gods to stave off the common devastating and inexplicable flash floods which struck the region, made worse by the flat nature of the Tigris-Euphrates plain. For instance, on one occasion in Sumerian myth, Enlil destroyed all of humanity with a flood simply because they were too noisy, showing the arbitrary and often capricious nature of the Mesopotamian gods. Early village settlements in the land between rivers required most or all of the population to be engaged in the production of food. This was known as the Ubaid period, which lasted from around 6,500 to 3,800 BC, of which Eridu is a prominent settlement. However, the increasing food surplus allowed the maintenance of full-time specialized workers who were not engaged in agriculture, such as merchants, weavers, metallurgists, and craftsmen. It is worth noting that the taxation and redistribution of food supplies led to the formation of governments. The first true city of the Mesopotamian area is disputed, but most historians believe that it was the famous urban center at Uruk, whose urban way of life was indisputably superior to all of its surrounding contemporaries. Huge buildings were present, as well as social hierarchy, high officials, and temple-sponsored craft workshops. This early city developed a stratified society and was initially not ruled by a king as we know them, but as a high priest of the temples. There were two of these temple complexes in Uruk, the Iana district and the older Anu district. This proto-king's power was derived from his leading role in the temple itself, representing the various gods and goddesses of Sumer. Just below the priest-king in status were the keepers, scribes, priests, and administrators whose activities were meant to ensure the community's organization and cohesion. At the bottom of the hierarchy were the producers, such as farmers and fishermen. The very first systems of writing also developed in this period, possibly as a memory aid for the recording of tributes, taxes, and distributions of surplus food, and were mainly based on simple symbols rather than representing a spoken language. From 3500 BC onwards, the influence of Uruk over the surrounding areas became increasingly clear to see. The buildings of the Ascendant City and its iconic and pioneering mass-produced pottery and tools also found themselves in settlements all across the Near East from Syria to Iran, such as Susa. The people who brought them probably settled in existing towns with existing populations, made colonies of their own on unoccupied land, or even invaded other settlements violently from their dominant position in Uruk. The latter phenomenon occurred at Tel Hammukar, where native architecture was burned and destroyed, followed by the construction of buildings in the Uruk style, the earliest noted occurrence of organized warfare. The pseudo-colonial effort may have been attempted in order to obtain resources which were not present in resource-poor Mesopotamia, such as wood, obsidian, stone, or metals, rather than it being a conscious effort to forge an empire. Attesting to the far-reaching nature of Uruk's civilization at this time, it is also thought that they had a presence in Egypt as well, whose tombs in the pre-dynastic period began to be constructed in the Uruk niche and buttress style. However, around the year 2900 BC, it seems that the Uruk colonies, such as Habuba Kabira, abruptly disappear from outside southern Mesopotamia. Meanwhile, Uruk itself appears to have been razed in some devastating event and gradually lost its hegemonic status. We do not know exactly what happened to end the Uruk period, but it could have been that those colonized individuals rebelled against Uruk, or a civil war occurred between different factions in the city. Over the centuries following the decline of Uruk, a number of Sumerian city-states emerged and grew in size. This created a political map which would have appeared similar to ancient Greece and its network of city-states. These city-states mostly consisted of an urban centre and a hinterland consisting of various villages. Examples of such city-states included Lagash, Umma, Nippur, Eridu, Lhasa, and Uruk itself, which retained its power but not its hegemony. In the centuries from 2900 to around 2350 BC, known as the Early Dynastic Period, the population of Sumer grew dramatically, possibly due to immigration from other regions or increasing agricultural productivity. This strained the resources of the various city-states and necessitated territorial expansion, leading to continuous intercity conflicts over border regions. The military leaders during these small-scale wars were often elected by a popular assembly in a form of primitive democracy, though this soon unraveled into a dynastic system. These military leaders are said to have been the first kings, or lugals, literally great men. Also in this period, another dominant structure emerged to rival the temple, the palace, House of Kings. The iconic Gilgamesh is thought to have been a historical king of Uruk in the early dynastic period, possibly reigning around 2800 to 2500 BC, though the tale also could have been based on a mythical figure. We have a documented account of one of the many border conflicts over a 150-year period from 2500 to 2350 BC. The kings of Lagash, wealthy on account of their prosperous agriculture and position on a trade route to Susa, wrote their accounts of a continuous border conflict with their western neighbour, the city of Umma. Owing to the prominence of agriculture in the economies of ancient Mesopotamia, these two rival city-states engaged in a conflict over the region of Gu-Edena, which was rich in fields and pasturelands. One victorious king, Eannatum of Lagash, portrayed himself as a champion of his respective local god. Ningirsu of Lagash and Sharu of Umma were depicted as the lords of the conflict, using the kings of the various cities as their deputies. It is interesting to note that this initial borderland between Umma and Lagash was reportedly drawn by Enlil of Nippur, the supreme god, and this again indicates his prominence in Mesopotamian religion. Due to the amount of victory inscriptions by the kings of Lagash during this period, it can be inferred that they were dominant. While the temple had largely lost its political dominance over Sumerian city-states to the kings at this point, the economic and ideological position of the temple remained strong. They were a total institution, comprising spaces dedicated to the gods, only accessible by high priestly officials, courtyards for communal gatherings, storehouses for the accumulation and distribution of food surpluses, archives, and workshops. Another example of the ideological dominance of religion is that while the king would lead the military action, the outcome would be credited to and determined by the will of the city god. The concept of city gods is worth further discussion. During this time of relative equilibrium between the many city-states of Lower Mesopotamia, each political entity housed one of the Sumerian gods. For instance, Ur was the home of Nanna, god of the moon and wisdom, while Uruk housed Inanna, goddess of war and fertility. Most prominent was the long-lasting city of Nippur, which sat on the border between Sumer and Akkad to the north. Its patron god was Enlil, considered as the supreme god of the Mesopotamian pantheon. Many prospective kings of cities such as Ur, containing lesser gods, commonly sought the recognition of Nippur due to its prominent religious position. The period of labyrinthine diplomatic and military relations between the many Sumerian city-states gradually began to give way to additional centralization in the region by the late 3rd millennium BC. Why this happened is not known, but it is possible that the rulers in this period had heard of the now unified Old Kingdom of Egypt, which ruled the entirety of the Nile River Valley and built the famous pyramids, and wished to emulate their power and wealth. For a century and a half, Umma had been humbled by their more powerful neighbour of Lagash, but this was soon to change. A dynamic new ruler, Lugal-Zaggisi, ascended to the kingship in Umma and began to expand his realm, hungering for revenge against Lagash. He first conquered the prominent cities of Ur and Uruk before defeating his rival, sacking the city, and plundering its temples of rich goods. Having established his territorial kingdom by 2350 BC, Lugal-Zaggisi moved his capital to the prestigious city of Uruk, establishing the 3rd dynasty of that city. However, his new kingdom would not last for long, and soon a figure from the north of Sumer would create the first true empire in history.